This is part 2 of the video, and we are dealing with the section called Answering the Question. This comes from the book called English Literature, written by Martin Stephen. So in the previous video we mentioned that very often students will put down a quotation and just leave it, wrongly assuming that it is obvious why it is there in the essay. It is never obvious. You should always explain why you have chosen to include a quotation or a reference to an incident or character. What Stephen means by this is that besides including a quotation in our essay, we also need to explain what it means and why we have decided to include that quotation. How is that line related to the opinion, the point we are trying to give, the point we are trying to make? Let's now have a look at quotations. Any good essay will contain quotations. Provide none, and you are depriving yourself of your main evidence for proving any point that you may make. There are 3 basic mistakes which commonly occur in essays with regard to the use of quotations. These mistakes are: number 1, misquoting or presenting the quotation wrongly. Number 2, quoting too much. And number 3, turning poetry into prose. Let's now take each of these mistakes individually. Number 1, misquoting or presenting the quotation wrongly. What does Stephen mean by misquoting? When we misquote, we do not copy the quotation as it was in the original text, and this is obviously a mistake. So it is essential that you quote accurately, down to the last comma and full stop, even if you think the original writer has made a mistake. The meaning of this is the following: we cannot change words from the original text when we are quoting. If we are not happy with the original text, then probably instead of quoting, we need to just refer to that part of the text using our own words. This is also possible, but if you decide to quote, you need to copy the words as they are in the original text. We cannot take words out and we cannot change them either. Remember that to quote means repeat or copy out. Okay? So when we quote, we repeat or copy words from a text or speech written or spoken by another person. The second problem is quoting too much. Long quotations are a menace. After all, the examiner is marking you, not the original author. The best quotations are usually not more than 4 or 5 lines long at most, and are often shorter than that. Now, how are we going to present a quotation? How are we going to include a quotation in our essay? The rules for presenting a quotation are quite simple. If a quotation is 2 lines or less in the original text, this is what this means, it can be run on in your essay without starting a new line. All that is needed is a comma before the quotation, and the quotation to be marked off with inverted commas. Let's see an example. Hamlet's bitterness and anger towards women come to the surface with increasing frequency as the play progresses, as when he orders Ophelia, "Get thee to a nunnery." The quotation here is just one line, "Get thee to a nunnery." As you can see, it has been run on in the essay. This means that the author, the writer, the student does not need to start on a new line. We just put a comma and run on the quotation. This can be done when the quotation is 2 lines or less, so this applies to short quotations. If it is poetry that you are quoting, you can still run on a quotation of 2 lines or less, but the end of one line in the text and the start of another must be marked by a diagonal line. Let's see the example. Othello's anger is clearly heard in the lines, "Now by heaven my blood begins my safer guides to rule." As you can see, this is poetry, and the line ends after heaven. So, "my blood begins my safer guides to rule." In the original text, that line appears on a separate line, on a separate verse. So, when the first line ends after heaven, we need to place a diagonal line to show that this is the end of that verse in the poem. Where a quotation occupies more than 2 lines in the original text, it should be preceded by a comma, started on a new line, and indented. This means given an extra left-hand margin. Inverted commas can be useful for complete clarity. And there we can see an example. In this case, the quotation has 4 lines. In this case, we cannot run on the quotation on the same line we have been writing. We need to start on a new line, and the first line of the quotation must be indented. You can also use indentation for the whole quotation if you want. So Othello's anger is clearly heard in the lines, "Now by heaven my blood begins my safer guides to rule, and passion having my best judgment collide, essays to lead the way." That's the complete quotation. Notice that in this case we don't need to use diagonal lines because the quotation is longer. Okay? And this was the last mistake, turning poetry into prose. If something is written as poetry, it is written on a line-by-line basis, and it is essential that you should quote it as poetry, keeping to the original line arrangements. This is what we did with this example, okay? This is the end of that section on quotations. Now, there's a section in the chapter devoted to the title of the text we are dealing with. And here there are also some rules. Punctuating the title. First of all, find out the correct title of the poem, story, play, or novel you are studying. The title of a book or play should be put in italics. The title of an individual poem should be placed between inverted commas. Never use more than one font if you are word processing, and make it a standard one, such as Times New Roman. Use 1.5 line spacing if the piece you are writing will be written on by the examiner. Always write the title in full. And finally, start each word of the title with a capital letter, unless the title page of the book does it differently. This is the end of the second part of the video.